think so. I'm just checking I've got everybody. I think I've caught most people so far, I think.
Okay. A huge welcome to everybody to our very first full and formal Council of Governors on Microsoft Teams. This will be the first time we've actually run a formal COG on Microsoft Teams, because it may seem like a long time ago, but the last time we actually formally held a COG meeting was back in March, at which point some of our colleagues on the call on the session today won't have been governors, and we were unable to run our scheduled meeting in May, of course, due to COVID. We've been building up to this moment by doing lots of practice runs on various briefings that we've undertaken on Microsoft Teams. So hopefully everyone who's using it today will be familiar with the principles and will be able to participate in the way that we would hope. So a huge welcome to everybody. Were there any particular apologies, Tracy, that we wanted to report? You're on mute, Tracy.
Sorry, Chelsea Rain sent her apologies this morning.
Okay, and that's the particular apology. And I also wanted to alert colleagues that Tony Lowcock is currently not available for governor and lead governor related activities, so he won't be able to join today's meeting either. So thank you, everybody. Great to see you all, and look forward to a productive meeting. We've got a fairly packed agenda, and there's a couple of practical things I need to do before we get on to the meat of it. First of all, are there any items of interest specifically relating to items on today's agenda that anyone would like to alert me to? No? Okay, just a quick reminder that what you need to do if you would like to raise a question or make a comment, I'd be very grateful if you could use the raise hand facility, which sort of just looks like an upraised palm on the menu bar, which should be in front of you. If you're unable to see that, then please put whatever you need into chat, which is what looks like a text icon in your menu. You could put any comments or questions in there, and we can try and pick those up. I'll try and keep an eye on those and bring people in if they need to. If you can't see either of those, try waving at me, but do bear in mind I can't see everybody, so chat and raised hands would be better, but perhaps other colleagues will keep an eye out if somebody wants to come in as well and alert me in case I've missed it. So I'm going to need all your help to make sure nobody gets missed out if people want to contribute. Okay, so no declarations of interest. What I would like to do is item 3 then, which is a governor member update. Really pleased today to welcome formally to the Council of Governors a number of new governors. I know we've welcomed our new governors to our various briefing meetings, but we do need to formally record people's presence on the actual council meeting today. So Tracy, could I ask you just to read out the list of new governors and governor changes since our last formal council meeting, please? Tracy, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think somebody's muted me. So the governors who have joined us since the last council meeting are Zoe Martin, Public Governor for Kettering and Corby, Helen Clark, Public Governor for Northampton, Neil Goosey, Adult Service User Governor, Beverly Sturgis, Adult Service User Governor, Scott Fitzsimmons, Carer Governor, Fiona Judge, Carer Governor, Paul Kelly, Carer Governor, and they all joined on the 24th of April. Paul Joy was re-elected on the 24th of April, and he's Public Governor for Kettering and Corby. And Chelsea Rain and Younger Service User Governor, and Roshni Khatri, Partner Governor of the University of Northampton, also joined us from the 24th of June. And the governors that have left since the last council meeting are Stuart Fitzgerald, who was the Unregistered Nurses Staff Governor, Richard Dobson, Public Governor for Kettering and Corby, whose term ended on the 23rd of April, Sandra Benrose, Carer Governor, who left on the 23rd of April, whose term ended, John Turnbull left as the Partner Governor for the University of Northampton, and Margaret Horn stepped down as the Older Service User Governor.
That's quite a lot of changes there for everybody to take on board. So lots of new faces to welcome, but hopefully people will have met some of those colleagues through various other meetings that we've had. I can see, Tracy, that Roshni's come up on my screen, but it's to join the Councillor Governor's private session, so you might want to alert her that she needs to use the other link. So I think, you know, be a great opportunity for all our new members to join the meeting today. Please, everybody take part and contribute as much as you can. We've got a workshop session later, which will be a great opportunity for people to hear from lots of different voices on the council. So I really look forward to starting that session with you. I can see that something's come up in chat, so I'm just checking, but that I can't actually see that at the moment, so I shall come back to that. Okay, moving on then to the next item on the agenda. We've got minutes of the previous meeting, and I think there's been a matter that's been raised for us to attend to regarding the minutes of the previous meeting, and I'll just ask Richard to comment on that. Richard?
Certainly, thanks, Krishni, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, Janet Hathaway and I had a conversation about the minutes and in respect of minute COG 2020. So I think it's at the bottom of page 2 on the minutes, and a change has been proposed simply to, I guess, more accurately describe the motion that was put forward at the last meeting in March. So what I'm proposing to do really is just to read out the proposed amendment to the minutes, and ask then for your approval for that amendment. So apologies, I'm just going to be reading from a script here. So this is COG 2020, and this is the proposed new version. So item 6, motion, Janet Hathaway, Public Governor, Wellingborough and East Northants, put forward a motion seconded by Tony Lowcock, Lead Governor, Des Savage, Public Governor, Northampton, Colin Cohen, Public Governor, Rest of England, and Richard Dobson, Public Governor, Kettering and Corby. The motion read as follows: that this Council of Governors meeting requests that the Board of Directors at its next meeting considers and records its views as required in Your Statutory Duties, Chapter 4, page 31, on the issues which follow. The Council requests a written response for the next Council meeting. NHFT Council of Governors believes that all Northamptonshire citizens should have access to appropriate healthcare based on individual need. The Council has particular concern over those with dual diagnosis, for whom clear pathways of care beyond emergency treatment may be lacking. For example, those with a disability and mental health problems, those with addiction and mental health problems, and frail elderly patients with both physical and mental health needs. The difficulties experienced by many homeless people in accessing healthcare services, both primary and secondary, has given rise to disquiet in the press and members of the public, particularly having regard to the apparent rise in the number of deaths. The Council urges the Trust to take a proactive role in highlighting this matter with the Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership, as that body is in a unique position to promote and develop new approaches to tackling the different problems of dual diagnosis. For the purpose of the motion, the meaning of the term dual diagnosis was broadened from people with comorbid mental health and substance misuse disorders to encompass people with multiple needs that are complex for public and voluntary sector organisations to manage. The Deputy Chief Executive described how the Trust has been working in partnership with borough councils and district general hospitals to introduce health and housing officers into ward teams. Health and housing officers will work with people in the trust wards who have a housing issue that might prevent safe and timely discharge following their hospital stay. She explained how GP practices such as the Maple Access Partnership in Northampton are helping people to access support from NHFT, and highlighted the potential of a service she'd seen in London where council teams identified those who are homeless and supported them to access NHS care. The Chief Executive and Director of Strategy and Business Development highlighted the work the Trust has been doing with voluntary sector organisations such as Mind and the Hope Centre to introduce crisis cafes in several towns across the county. The motion was unopposed and carried. It will be referred to the Board of Directors. So apologies, that was a little bit lengthy, but that's the proposed new version that's requested to be inserted in the minutes.
Thank you, Richard. I know quite a few colleagues won't have been at that March meeting, so won't be able to comment on that. But I think we were satisfied that really was just about sort of enhancing the clarity of the minute. So it is proposed for everyone to approve the change to the minutes based on what Richard has read out. So can I take it that everyone is happy to support that? And if anyone's got any concerns, please raise their hand. So I'm assuming Fiona's not raising her hand because she's got a concern about the minute, but
it's actually just to say Chris Davison on the chat has just said something about updating the council about provision for homeless people. Just wanted to draw that to your attention, Krishni. And then I do have something else that I do need to cover before we go on with the rest of the meeting, please.
Yes, thank you. Chris, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to offer an apologies from Scott Fitzsimmons, who has to accompany his wife to a healthcare appointment, and Zoe's going to be a bit late as well. I just thought, casting our minds back, there is reference to our homeless and rough sleeper community. And I thought my fellow governors might like to be aware, as I'm sure they would have seen on the national and local media, that borough councils had 48 hours to move homeless and rough sleepers into local hotels. And I was involved in a voluntary capacity to help with food distribution. And during lockdown, I supported Northampton Borough Council staff at one of the hotels in distributing food. It was a great example of how the voluntary sector came together with statutory services. And the Hope Centre provided food. There was at one time nearly 120 people, and just to give you the distinction, rough sleepers you need a register, homeless is slightly different. But I'm pleased to report that during the 3.5 months of lockdown, 70 of our rough sleepers and homeless people were successfully found assisted homes during that period, and provision has been made for transitional support for those homeless people who are yet to find a base. What I found helpful as a public governor was being able to support and signpost borough council staff, particularly to the 24/7 integrated mental health response hub, but it also showed a lot of joint working with accessing healthcare, both primary with GPs. It was quite salutary at times. Absolutely, I felt quite vulnerable. There was lack of PPE at the start. We also had somebody who was unfortunately looked to complete suicide, but we were able to signpost them to the services needed both in the acute sector and in primary care. And it was a great example of how provision both across NHS, public, social care came together with the voluntary sector. It was quite a rewarding time, but also one that showed how agencies can work together. So just to give my governors an update on how that services have been provided during lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Really helpful, and I think there's been a comment. Angela kind of confirmed that she thought that was fantastic news. I think there's been a lot of really good work done during the pandemic, and I think this is a really good example of how people have pulled together to support a particular group who are especially vulnerable and would have been especially vulnerable during the pandemic. So thank you very much for that update, Chris. Are there any other matters arising relating to the minutes? or any other points relating to the minutes before we move on? Okay, so I'll take it that the minutes are approved with that amendment. I was recalled before we move on to the rest of the agenda, I think I probably do need to alert you to the fact that we have invited members of the public to observe this meeting, and we believe that there are some, maybe at least one person observing this meeting. So we will kind of, you know, it's the first time we've tried to run a Microsoft Teams meeting with public observers, and actually we didn't manage. We tried to do that with the board and we didn't quite manage to do that there. So obviously this will be a good lesson, a good experience for all of us to see how that worked and maybe get some feedback from the people who have been able to do it. Because it might help us going forward in terms of public engagement with the Council of Governors, which perhaps has been harder to achieve. I should also mention, and you should see a banner going across the top of the Microsoft Teams window that you're looking at, that we are recording this session. Fiona, I don't know whether you want to comment on the purpose of that and how we might use that.
Of course. So I think it's a really important sort of an historic step forward for us in our new virtual way of working to actually be trying this out today. So and I am thrilled that actually we have been asked for the link by members of the public. So hopefully we will have more than one. But part of the reason why we are recording it and obviously live streaming it is so that we can actually put it onto our website, so people that miss it will actually be able to see it in due course, and they'll be able to see it, and that actually maximises our reach to people, and it demonstrates and augments our public accountability. So that's really why we're doing it today. And again, this is hopefully a start of how we will be doing things in the future, and we're hoping that you're going to be coming up with lots of good ideas for the workshop session this afternoon. So then this is part and parcel of us stepping into this new direction. So thank you, Krishni.
Thank you, Fiona. So I'm just picking up on a couple of other comments that were in the chat box. Chris Smith-Haynes, who's our partner governor representing NCC, just commented, I would like to praise Kettering Borough Council and Accommodation Concern for housing homeless in Kettering, providing furniture, fridges and regular hot food. So another very positive story relating to how the homeless community have been supported. So thank you very much. I think we can now move on to the meat of our agenda. And I hope everyone's comfortable on Microsoft Teams so far. I know there's probably a couple of, I saw that Zoe's here, but struggling to get her video working, but hopefully Zoe, you can hear us all right. And we can help maybe fix that for future, but hopefully everyone can hear everyone clearly. It would be good if you're not speaking for people to go on mute, and just helps with the sound quality. But obviously do remember, if you are on mute, to unmute yourself if you want to comment, because it's the easiest thing in the world to forget to do that, and I've certainly done that myself. Okay, without any further ado then, we're going to crack on with the first main item on the agenda, which is the Chairs and Chief Executives report. Before I hand over to Angela, who I know people will be keen to hear from, because it's probably it seems like an awful long time since Angela had the opportunity to speak to governors via the Council of Governors meeting. But a couple of things I just want to briefly update you on that perhaps we've discussed through the very many briefings that we've had with governors. So I think it's been great that although we've not had the opportunity to have a formal Council of Governors since March, we've certainly had these variety of briefing sessions, and we had great attendance actually at many of these briefing sessions, which was fantastic. I think at the last one that we had, there was something like 19 people present, so that was excellent. And we also in the latter few kind of managed to get our non-executive directors to to be there too, because obviously recognising the important link that our non-executive directors have with our governors and the opportunity being provided for governors to ask them questions. So we continue to sort of work on how we might keep you updated and informed in between our formal councillor governor sessions, but I certainly welcome the opportunity, and I hope you have, at having some interaction with people in between these formal sessions and hearing about the Trust's handling of the pandemic. Couple of very quick updates from some of those briefing sessions that we had. One was that we advised you, I think it was at the last briefing session, that we needed to submit various self-certifications. It was an item that Chris commented on and spoke about, Chris Davison as chair of M&G. And I really just wanted to report that those self-certifications have been done. And thank you to all those governors who took the trouble to comment on the statements that were issued. So that was successfully completed. I also wanted to say that our annual report and accounts, which as for those of you who've been a governor for a while will know how important those milestones are for the Trust annually, producing an annual report and accounts and equality accounts. And this year that was constrained by the COVID pandemic and, you know, auditors not being able to do all of their normal functions. But due to, credit to everybody involved, not least the corporate governance team on this call today, on this meeting today, we actually managed to complete that process successfully and submitted the report and accounts in line with our regulators' expectations. And actually, important to say that we will have an annual general meeting of the Council of Governors where those things will be formally presented to you, and we plan to do that in any case. But some of you will also be aware that in the past we've had, alongside the annual general meeting, we've had an annual public and members meeting, so we've combined the two things together. And originally we thought that we wouldn't be able to do that given the pandemic, and the advice from our regulators was that we should stand that down. But actually we've had some new advice now, which is to say that we might want to think about running that on a virtual basis, much as we're having to do in any case with the Council of Governors. So what I really just wanted to alert you on is that this is something that normally a task and finish group has managed, a sort of, a group that's been set up by the membership and governance group, and we'll be looking at how we do that going forward. So don't know when the timing of that will be, but we'll obviously liaise with Chris and other colleagues who were actively involved in that process last year, and looking forward to that, because that, it may be that it presents us, running it virtually will present us with a whole set of new opportunities for engaging with people who might not normally attend that meeting. Okay, I think that covers everything I wanted to say. So if there are no questions for me on any of those, I'm now going to hand over to Angela. There is actually a Chief Executive's report, which colleagues may have wanted to ask any questions about. But first, as is customary, we'll ask Angela to just comment on things that are really at the top of her agenda, and then there might be some questions that people want to ask. So over to Angela.
Thanks, Krishni, and just say how good it is to see everybody. So that's fantastic. So it's good to be here. So just a couple of things I want to comment on, and you would expect me to mention COVID. This is really centre stage and remains centre stage for us, and rightly so at this time. So as much as you'd expect me to raise issues, obviously COVID would be one of them, but as part of that I would want to convey my enormous thanks to the staff in this organisation and the public who are supporting us in a tremendous way to manage a very difficult situation. So I think it is important to share COVID is still very much at the heart of my thoughts, and I know Sandra's going to do some further discussions about how we're restoring and recovering, which I'm sure governors will be interested about as well. But before I talk about some other areas of concern or issue, I just also wanted to build on some of the work we're doing around our BAME staff, and to just share with the Council of Governors that of course we're doing what other trusts are doing in relation to risk assessments, but we're also working with other partners, Leicestershire Partnership Trust and Sussex, to actually start to look much more as a collaborative about what more can be done. And we're looking at our data together, we're looking at how we can challenge ourselves, we're looking at how we can bring in some of the themes out of our risk assessments and our listening events to stretch us even further. And through that, I've just come off a national call where I was asked to share our work with national chairs and chief execs, so that others could also adopt some of what we're doing. And I talk very much about this being at the heart of our cultural work. And I also was lucky enough to be invited to a session yesterday with Baroness Lawrence to talk about BAME and communities, which I know is something that governors would also be of interest, because there is a review going on that Baroness Lawrence is leading. So just really wanted to mention those. But the other areas, in addition to COVID, that I'd want to mention would be about safeguarding. And I've mentioned this before, so it's not necessarily a new area, but it's one that will remain very high in my worry list, because governors will know that we've had worries before as a system in relation to safeguarding, and again in terms of some of the support that's available in other organisations, not necessarily our own. But I think the COVID situation has probably, if you like, crystallised some of that for me. And I think we need to think very carefully about how we work together with partners to understand how this has affected children and young people. And there is increasing concern for me about the access to children and young people through schools, the access of people being homeschooled, the access in relation to referrals, which obviously change as well through this situation. So I think safeguarding remains one of those. And the second one, which again is interesting in terms of what we've talked about so far, is both a challenge but also an opportunity, and is very much occupying my thoughts, is about health inequalities. Because again, through the COVID experience, I think we can all see that this is highlighting and reaffirming the health inequalities that exist, across the country. And again, through the services that we deliver, we know that many of our service users are vulnerable, and the COVID experience makes people even more vulnerable. So I think the health inequalities agenda is something that I think we've got to be proactive in supporting our system to understand what that means. I get a little bit concerned as people start to segment people into mental health, cancer, maternity, and whilst we know that's useful, we need to get into what do health inequalities look like, because they're often a coexistence of conditions and experiences. And I think that's a whole different frame that we're going to need to come at, and that takes data. So I think data is something we need to push for through the partnership, but not just data, the intelligence and analysis that goes with it. Because if people look at the information, very often the story is there, and it wouldn't take us much to look at that. So I think that's where I'm at. And then my final point to mention is just that a huge thanks to everybody who was involved or participated in the virtual wellbeing festival that we operated, which was a fantastic amount of work, but was clearly led from the work that we've done here at NHFT. We discussed that in the system about the importance of wellbeing. I'm really pleased that our system partners were supportive too, and we ran that event across the system. So again, a new experience because it was virtual, but nevertheless, hopefully one that we've all benefited from and continue to, actually, because the video material is still available. So huge thanks from me to everybody who helped us put that on. Thanks, Krishni.
Thank you, Angela. Can I also just add my sort of encouragement really to people to go and view some of the sessions from the Virtual Wellbeing Festival. I mean, the talks are inspirational. I actually sat through, I was sort of had several, I couldn't join them live, but there were several that I've been able to listen to afterwards, and they were absolutely brilliant. Clark Carlisle talking about mental health and actually his personal mental health experience. I don't know if colleagues will know him, but I didn't know that he was actually ex-Northampton Town, so it seemed really appropriate, but a footballer for Northampton Town, but then a Premier League footballer, and his journey with his mental health was just such a just such an important experience to hear about. So I would strongly recommend that. I also watched part of Dame Kelly Holmes' session, and that was also inspiration. So really great sessions. And I know some staff are re-watching Disco Diva and various other exercise forms that have been recorded. So I would definitely encourage people to access them whilst the opportunity is still available. Now, I know there have been a few comments, so I just want to raise some questions on behalf of people who've commented or read out the comments. There was just one, Angela, about the risk assessments. I know that you touched on those. Could we say something maybe a little bit more about how we're actually progressing with the rollout and to what extent we're near sort of completion of the risk assessment? Wendy would quite like to know. Wendy's one of our new governors.
Yes, yeah. No, thanks, Wendy. I mean, these are obviously very, very important. And just to say that, just again, frame where we've gone with the risk assessments, I think it's important for governors to know that we did take opportunity to co-produce some of those risk assessments so that people were able to give us their sense of what and how a good risk assessment could be taken forward. So I think that's important to frame as well. So through our Instant Coordination Centre, which is a daily coordination, we have an active log of the risk assessments that are being undertaken. So we're able to split those by our BAME staff, number in the trust. We could look at protected characteristics. We've looked at people who are perhaps over 55. We've looked at age and other conditions, and that the ICC tracks that for us so that we can get a daily update on that. And I think it's important to say that in relation to our BAME risk assessments, I think we've now got up to, it's very close to 90%. Sandra can probably give me the accurate data, but it's very, very close because we've been absolutely chasing the nature of that, because as everybody will know, each one is as important. So we are very much on that, and we will be publishing those figures, because again, I think we need to be very transparent about them with our public and with our staff. So again, we've got that that in hand. But yes, I think Sandra just wants to come in on that detail. Yeah. But I think the other thing is to say that it's not just the risk assessment tool, but the nature of the conversations people are having, which is important to convey. So the compassionate conversation is the important one, because again, people, whilst they may not have risk factors that we can recognise in relation to protected characteristics, often people have fear. So the conversation is as important as identifying the particular risk factors that are there. Sandra.
Thanks, Angela. I think it's probably worth just giving a complete up-to-date picture, as we have been tracking it every day. So we have 94% of our BAME risk assessments completed, and we're well on track in all of the other cohorts. So a really good picture, and I'm very proud of the staff for completing those.
Yeah. And I think that, again, the nature of them is they have to remain dynamic. So what we don't want to do is to say, oh, that's job done. We need to make sure that these become active and dynamic, because circumstances change, guidance changes even. You know, as we've gone through the COVID incident, you know, guidance has changed, and we need to make sure that we can adapt and flex accordingly to that as well.
Okay, thank you, Angela. That's really helpful update and helpful to know exactly where we are. But I think the emphasis that you put on it, which is it's the quality of the process, not just a tick box activity, really, that is important, isn't it? And so really important to emphasise that. Neil has asked, just because it links to it, I'm just picking up Neil's question. As part of the risk assessment process, what engagement is made with BAME staff to identify issues and concerns they may have?
Yeah, so really important point. So we took a step early on to do some listening events. Lots of reasons for that, not least that we knew there's a lot of fear and anxiety amongst our staff group, but because also we needed to share stories about people's experiences. And through that, we've been able to, if you like, adapt and co-produce the risk assessment from our BAME staff. So our BAME network's been very active with us. We've introduced people to support our occupational health service because that was some feedback that we had. So I think that's been important. We've also got cultural ambassadors that help us throughout the trust and continue to do that. So it's been a very active engagement with our BAME staff to give us issues and concerns. And that's included things like, you know, wellbeing support that they may need or access to supporting each other. So I feel a level of confidence that we have engaged and continue to engage, and co-production is what we've wanted to achieve, and hopefully that's what we continue to be doing.
Thank you, Angela. And I think Wendy's just asked, were there any specific issues or particular issues that jumped out of those BAME conversations? But I seem to recall from the initial listening events, it was as much about sort of culturally sensitive wellbeing support, wasn't it? That was sort of one of the things, in addition to things that other staff, all staff would be concerned about, like PPE and testing and all of that.
Yes, and I think we certainly, in the initial incident, there was a lot of concern around PPE, and that's, I'm sure people would understand that was very much centre stage around the issues people had, and guidance changed and all of that was happening at the same time as well. But I think the other thing that was very striking is the amount of support and management our BAME staff are having to do with their families as well, because the fear and anxiety is with families and coming into work and dealing with that and managing that, and you know, in their own communities. That was something that was really came across very clearly to me, is that, you know, that responsibility and discussions that were going on at a family level was something we needed to hear.
Thank you, Angela. So another question that's come up from Helen Clark. Helen's also one of our new governors. Do we know yet what the impact will be on NHFT following the announced changes to NHCP structures and also government funding of the NHS nationally? I'm not sure exactly what NHCP structure changes Helen's referring to, but do you want to comment generally around that?
Yes, so in the report I've touched on some of the interim changes to governance arrangements that the NHC Partnership Board have done. So we've continued to meet virtually, that's important. And of course, as we have done in the trust, stood down anything that is not essential at this time, and that's obviously important to do. But what we've been doing is looking at the governance. It's very important, and particularly important, as we've mentioned already, that the NHCP continues to meet, because it has a role around health inequalities and making sure that we can go forward. So we're very much around the table. So we remain around the table. We're influencing and contributing to the governance structures that are being proposed and have been proposed. So we remain very engaged in that. And there's also a series of work streams emerging around areas that people would recognise here around the frailty, supporting discharge processes, mental health, etc. And we continue to keep very much involved in those. So the Mental Health Transformation Board has continued to operate. And again, those things are something that we would want to carry on with. Finance teams continue to meet virtually weekly. So Richard, if he was here, would tell you that still happens. So whilst there's interim and transitionary arrangements around the NHCP, we are very engaged and remain in that space, and will do.
Great, thank you, Angela. And the final question from Rosie Herring, who is one of our partner governors as well. It was about testing and whether all the staff have been tested, and if so, what percentage tested positive. Now, I think the testing has been based on really need rather than sort of staff wide, but do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so a couple of comments. So as you say, Krishni, what we're not doing is testing for everybody, because that's not the position that we've been in. We've had a couple of things happening. One is when people are symptomatic, then obviously testing happens. That happens as a staff member or members of their family in communities as well. So that's there. We were part of a pilot that introduced some further staff testing where we were able to have volunteers, if you like, to do testing. So that was important. And we're also doing antibody testing again. So we are rolling out antibody testing through the ICC as well. And again, that's not everybody, not everybody's been tested. My expectation around testing is that, and this is through the experience of Leicestershire, which I think is worth sharing, people will have seen Leicester City going to a lockdown position. What we're seeing there is in those areas where outbreaks do materialise, it is much more mass testing. So everybody in the area is tested. So it may be something that we see more of in Northamptonshire, not for sure, but we may do. And there equally is discussions about whether staff will be tested routinely going forward as part of those as well. So that's happening. In terms of the antibody testing, I think our prevalence, and again, Sandra will tell me if I'm wrong in terms of it, but I think it's in the order of about 10 to 12% that's emerged on the antibody testing. Am I right there, Sandra?
Hi, Angela. I was quite surprised actually. We had an update this morning, and
right.
We've taken about 2,200 tests, and less than 200 are positive for antibodies.
Right. Okay.
And we had about 4% in the pilot of people that were positive for COVID at the time.
Yeah, and that varies quite a lot actually across trusts, which is quite interesting. You know, there's been some trusts I've been in discussion with where actually they've had really high, up to 40%, and then some really low. So actually it's quite variable in terms of that that position. And of course we remain engaged about how the antibody testing will go forward, because again, it's not as clear as it needs to be yet in terms of what that means and how we can use that information in terms of our protection of staff or public.
Okay, thank you, Angela. A last couple of comments, questions. One was around NHFT supporting care homes, and because I think we briefed governors in the past in some of our briefing sessions that support actually has been provided as and when needed. Yes. There's some intention to really kind of develop that, isn't there, in the future? Yes. Around how community and primary care work together.
Yes, so a couple of things to say on that. So I think, again, I say people will be aware we've had some fragile care homes in Northamptonshire, and that has been challenging, and that's been as a result of often CQC findings, but people will have seen those in the press and heard about them. But on those occasions, we have supported system and partners in whatever has been needed, and Julie has been instrumental in terms of some of the IPC support and manager support through operations as well. So again, we've been a responsive partner in that regard. I think the other thing to say is that through the work we're doing through the NHCP on supporting discharge and integrated teams, that's where our care homes will be transformed, and we expect to share some of that in future sessions, I think, with governors. And I think Mark's commented about the frailty work. I think this would be really valuable to share going forward, because I think there's a real strong consensus about how we build around the primary care networks and how we build our community teams and primary care teams to support integrated working. And of course, care homes are just part of a community. So my expectation is care homes need to be seen in that regard. They're just where somebody lives in the same way as we would expect to support people. So that work is ongoing, and it would be good to share that in the future.
Thanks, Angela. And I think, you know, if everyone's agreeable, interestingly, I think we'd planned to bring that to council. Richard's nodding because I'm almost certain Sandra and I touched on it, that actually it'd be really good to talk about the frailty work before the pandemic. And obviously when the pandemic hit, you know, the kind of conversation, the focus changed to how we were responding to it. But it is a transformational priority, as Angela's highlighted and as Mark has commented in the chat. So bringing that back to governors, really to talk about, in a way, what we've learnt from COVID, but also sort of building on, you know, the original plans we had, how we might take that forward, I think would be a great topic. So we can certainly add it to the list and look at how we include that in a future council. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to bring up one final comment before we move on. And if there's anything that we haven't managed to sweep up whilst progressing through, we'll obviously pick that up and follow that through at the end. But Paul Joy has asked, how are staff numbers, how have staff numbers been affected by contracting COVID, albeit in a mild form? So I guess as measured by sickness absence, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yes. So just to say, and just to assure people, we track this on a daily basis so that we can see the absences across the trust at any one time. And just to give you a sense of it, it's come down gradually over the period. So our absence of staff generally is just under about 9%, but of that, that's just under 5% as COVID related.
Okay, great. Thank you, Angela. And an important final comment really from Mark before we move on from your session. And I think it's just really reflecting from Mark as a partner governor who's obviously perhaps close to what's happening in the system around the trust's response and the system's response to COVID, that it has been an incredibly hard period, undoubtedly, for yourselves and, you know, executive colleagues and all of the operational teams who've been so actively involved. So we should really recognise the amount of work, and I'm sure the council would want to recognise the enormous work that's been put in and the efforts that people have gone to really respond as well as we have done, albeit, you know, with challenges along the way, to what has been a really difficult situation, and to emphasise really how much, you know, it's important for all of us to support you and colleagues with your well-being. I think you've all been trying to take holidays, haven't you, to sort of make up really for all the long hours, etc. So it's really important to recognise that, I think. Angela.
Yes, no, I think it's appreciated, Krishni, but I think, you know, the team, I have no doubt the team would want to recognise what staff are doing, because actually everybody's gone above and beyond. And, you know, well, there's Sam's with us, Sam Benfield, but she will know through her experience, the ICC, that everybody is really absolutely going the extra mile. So I think we appreciate the feedback, but I think we take that feedback on behalf of everybody across the whole organisation, and we are trying to, as you know, put forward people's well-being, and the festival was part of that, but also make sure that people are taking leave, because, as you say, we do need a break from it. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Sam has said absolutely, so she's just supported your comment. Thank you, Angela, that's been really helpful. I'm sure colleagues have welcomed the opportunity to engage directly with you on the response to the pandemic and the sort of questions that people have had the opportunity to raise. We're going to move on now to a specific area, which is the Freedom to Speak Up update. Now, this was something that I think through the pandemic was actually really important, wasn't it, in terms of making sure people had the opportunity to can you hear me all right? I seem to, yeah. Bit of a, that might be people needing to mute their
I think it might be, Krishna, I think if people could just mute out, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
So, so we're going to freedom to speak up. I think is an area that our governors have asked about during the pandemic. You know, earlier in the pandemic response, because it was recognised as clearly a way, one of the ways in which people could raise concerns about how we were responding, etc. At the chairs meeting, it was decided that it'd be helpful just to have an update on that, to give a sense of themes that might have emerged from freedom to speak up. So I think we've invited Moira Ingham, who's our Quality and Governance Committee Chair, to provide an update, for Moira to sort of provide the assurance. We have got our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, Matt Asprey, who's waving at the moment, so I don't know if people can see Matt. Matt's also here in case there are any questions that Matt can answer. So I'll hand over at this point to Moira.
Yeah, thank you, Krishna, and thank you everybody for allowing me to give you a bit of an update today. We are going to do this as a double act, me and Matt, and that's because Matt is a member of Quality and Governance, and that's primarily the committee where we receive assurance on how we're dealing with freedom to speak up and the matters that arise from it. So I'm going to hand over to Matt because he's got the technical skills to provide you with some of a slide deck, and I will continue on with assurance as he speaks. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Maura. Good afternoon, everybody. So hello, my name is Matt Asprey. I've been the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian at NHFT since December 2016, and it was also an opportunity as well as to talk to you specifically about COVID. I'm conscious and interested hearing that we've got quite a few new governors, an opportunity just to give a little bit of background to what this thing is that Freedom to Speak Up is, what my role is, but how it affects the rest of the trust, and how in many ways we are different to other organisations in how we've embraced that and used it to really benefit the organisation and our service users and staff. I'm hoping you can all see the slide. We shall see how this goes. So just as a little bit of a background, it's a nationally mandated role in secondary care. It's part of the NHS standard contract that every trust has to have a Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. That's developed, the requirements for the role have developed over time, initially just to be a named role, and going forwards now with self-review returns and a lot more regulatory requirements from NHS E&I around that. So just some logistical bits. I'm supported by 14 champions in the organisation. So they're voluntary roles. They're people who've been trained up, who have an interest in speaking up, or who have experience speaking up, and therefore want to support other people in order to do that. There's a picture there of Diana Belfon, who was our first Freedom to Speak Up champion, and in the year after she became a champion, we had a 300% increase in speaking up from BME staff. So it really demonstrates the benefit of that. Our champions are spread across many different parts of the organisation, and I'm particularly proud of having champions from all of our staff networks, because there are particularly vulnerable groups of staff that often need support in order to speak up. So I'm accountable to the Quality and Governance Committee and produce a report there every quarter. And I also report to Public Board every 6 months. We complete, as part of those reports, a self-review tool that's returned through to NHS England and NHS Improvement, and that includes the Trust strategy for Freedom to Speak Up. And I also report directly into Angela, and I meet quarterly with Angela, Krishni and Moira as the non-exec and the executive leads for Speaking Up. So some of the some of the things that we've got, just in terms of to share some level of detail. This is our strategy for the last 2 years that we've had, and is due to be updated, slightly delayed due to COVID at the moment. But there's a lot of details that go into that and regularly updated in terms of objectives, milestones, outputs, and work that goes with that. And we track that very carefully in terms of our use of data. So things like the staff survey is a measure of that in a variety of areas. So we're able to keep track of that, and quarterly updating this through to Q&G in terms of work that's gone on. I think at that point, Maura, do you want to just comment on anything to do with the reporting?
Yeah, I think in terms of what Q&G see every quarter is quite a full and in-depth account of freedom to speak up matters as they arise within the trust. But I think it's also important to say that as we have Matt as a member of the committee, that if any live issues arise between those reports, we are able to have the discussion in the room there and then, so that things don't, so there's no stranding of issues until we receive the next quarter's report. They are dealt with, and live issues are considered in the room. I think in terms of the strategy, again, we see this quarterly, so we can hear from Matt whether there are any barriers, whether there's any delays, what can we do to help to move things on, and we do note and recognise progress when it's being made, and generally we receive quite a positive picture from Matt in terms of those outputs from the strategy, so that's good to see.
Thank you. And just to share just a little bit of recent information as well, the work that we've done has been recognised nationally. So today the National Guardian Office has published their Freedom to Speak Up Index from the staff survey results in the back end of in February this year, and we've moved up to third nationally. So that's based on our staff telling and feeding back through the staff survey that they feel secure in raising concerns, that they know how to do that, and that the organisation takes action when they're raised. Just as a bit of context, I'm also the regional lead for the East Midlands, so a network of guardians across the East Midlands, and I've been very closely working with colleagues in the East and in the West Midlands during COVID-19, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the benefits that we've had from that. And also to say at the HSJ Awards back in November, a long time ago now it feels, but we did get a highly commended from that award as well for the work that we've done, in particular about aligning freedom to speak up with our staff engagement approach.
Matt, if I just link back to the Champions Forum and just reflect on the most recent Champions Forum, we invited in members from the BAME network, and I think in light of some of the conversation and questions we've had earlier around BAME staff concerns around COVID, it was really good to have BAME colleagues with us, because we were able to relate that to the listening event, and the champions were able to discuss issues with their BAME colleagues, so that we didn't miss any of the things that had come through the listening event. And I'm trained as a champion myself and attend the meetings, and I from a personal reflection, I would say it was a really successful meeting because it did deal with live issues.
I think that's really important, like you said, Laura. I think the connections that we are creating across the organisation, and in particular just inviting members of that network into the forum in the trust, it was really powerful to hear their examples and their stories, but also to discuss with them some of the challenges that group of staff face in terms of speaking up, and being able to provide positive support for them and for their peers within that network, because it's very much that cascade that if we can create that psychological safety for people to talk about these things, the more we know about these issues that might be out there, the more we can do to deal with them and address them in the best way possible. If I turn to COVID-19, sorry.
But sorry, before we go on, just a comment from Alan that he was finding it difficult to read what was on screen. Are we planning on circulating these slides? I think it might be the detail that was actually on your slides of the strategy, and probably, you know, the other bits that were actually more detailed rather than the slides currently.
I'm happy to share that. Yeah. It is in the other thing just to mention, Christian, is that it is in the public. We do publish all of that information in the public board papers, including our self-review, which a lot of other trusts don't do. And very much in terms of transparency, we do choose to do that publicly because, you know, for us, there's nothing to hide within that. We're very open with that. But I'm happy to share the presentation afterwards, definitely.
And I think it gives a good example of the level of detail of information we see at quality and governance, and how we're able to interrogate down to quite fine detail.
If I move then to specifically into COVID-19 and the work that we've done as part of that, so on a personal level, I've been involved in working with the ICC at different points, as linking both roles as the staff engagement lead as well. So I've been able to be linked very closely in and now working as part of this the Trust Recovery Cell around staff support and wellbeing. We've ensured that throughout the pandemic and to date that we've encouraged and made sure that we've got visibility of freedom to speak up through communication, whether that's through as simple as having the contact details on every daily email, through spotlight articles that we've put out and blog articles, and also regularly meeting. I'm continuing to meet regularly with the equality team and the staff network leads through. As I mentioned, I'm also working within the East Midlands and the Midlands wider region. We're doing this on a whole region, West and East Midlands. It's been really helpful, particularly with teams, to be able to set up and we have a fortnightly sort of, it started as a half hour, it's now an hour meeting, but that's with guardians from across the whole of the Midlands area. And that's been really useful in terms of getting up to date sort of picture across the area for what the types of concerns that are coming up and the differences in nature of those. So particularly seeing differences between community and acute trusts and the types of concerns they're getting in, but also being able to link that back into the National Guardian Office and providing them with a picture of what the types of concerns and numbers that are coming up through that. So I've just got a couple of bits of information slides. Obviously, we've only just finished the end of the first quarter, and that will need to go through the relevant reporting processes. Just as a bit of context in terms of quarter four, which is from January to March 2018-19 and then 2019-20, actually we saw a decrease in the number of cases coming up through freedom to speak up on a year-by-year basis. However, if you do look at into March and April, if we break it down on a monthly basis, what we saw within 2019 was a decreasing number, and what we've seen across 2020, given the start of COVID was very late in March, what we've seen is a very steep uptick in terms of numbers coming through. To provide a little bit of assurance, that is something that's been reflected nationally. Very early on in March, there was a sense that a lot of things were being raised through COVID, through the Incident Coordination Centre when that was set up. And obviously, once we were through that initial recovery, we've seen a number of things starting to be raised via freedom to speak up, and very much they're the things that we're wanting to hear about to make sure that we are receiving that feedback from staff if they are concerned or worried. In quarter four, up to that point, there were only 3 concerns actually that related to COVID-19. Now, given that we went into lockdown on the 23rd of March, probably not hugely surprising. In each of those, there were other things that were being escalated to the ICC. And I think very much early on, we saw freedom to speak up. The aim of it is not for everything to come to me. It should be really going through line managers and feeling empowered to do so locally. And I think through the early parts of COVID-19, we saw that model, and there wasn't a significant change in the types of topics that were coming up through freedom to speak up. As time's gone on, as we've moved through the pandemic, we are seeing slightly higher numbers relating to COVID-19, more numbers coming up through vulnerable groups, so our BME or our BAME staff, but also from temporary and bank staff. And I think given the situation with them working in a variety of different areas, working in different ways, that's probably not a surprise to us. And some indirect impacts being seen. So we're starting to see, I think, relationship issues with colleagues starting to come up. Now, part of that, I think, is due to the fact that staff are very tired and fatigued. It's been a very, very long and difficult period of time for people, particularly in frontline areas. But also, as we start to talk about moving towards a new normal and a recovery, I think there's a lot of things that have probably been not necessarily suppressed, but people haven't wanted to talk about them because they're not necessarily as important at the moment. And as we move through, and if things are going to be different and as we go forwards, they would like to say something about those issues if they are coming up. The majority of those issues coming up are not anything that is time sensitive or of significant patient safety risks immediately. They are kind of more the longer term, the lower level, but still impacting on our staff across the organisation. I'm looking at Maura as to whether I can't remember where we said assurance that I was going to do this or you were, but I'm happy to if you want to.
Sorry, can I just pause you there for a moment?
Yeah.
Just a couple of questions from Sam. So I think Sam was originally saying, have numbers of freedom to speak up issues gone up or down? And you clearly said that they've gone up in the graph. Yeah. And have the issues changed? And again, I think you've answered that 25% clearly linked to COVID, and maybe the groups that are speaking up are different. What Sam's asked for clarification on is whether the emergent themes relate to Q4 data, i.e. the January to March period, or to April to June. So
sorry, from April onwards, those ones are.
Okay, so hopefully, Sam, that's just clarified that for you. Okay, do you want to carry on?
Just to follow on for Sam, really, the August Quality and Governance Committee, we will be considering Q1 data, because we do, just as another matter of assurance, we do receive a very detailed log of every individual case, which is covered by Freedom to Speak Up, and that does cover things like themes that are emerging. So we'll begin to see the sort of things that Matt's been alluding to, and also it'll give us the breakdown by service. So again, we'll be able to spot whether there are any services that are where particularly this is causing issues.
Okay, are you have we got a few more slides, or
just the last one? I think we're on to, Krishna.
Okay, lovely.
So just as a bit of assurances, and in terms of as a sort of an interim strategy of work that we're doing going forwards, we've continued, as I said, to engage with the staff networks, following from the listening events with BAME staff and reflecting on the Champions Forum that we had earlier last month. A recognition that actually, we need more champions from a BAME background. We do have Diana, but actually we do need some more. So we've had 5 volunteers from that staff network already come forward to say they would like to train up as champions. We're continuing to meet with the Champions Network in the Trust, which is helpful to kind of be able to pick up anything that they are sensing from across the organisation. And very much to say, the focus for us as an organisation continues to be on well-being. There's an example there of a piece of work that was carried out in the Trust early on in the pandemic around working differently, and this almost giving permission and recognising that people are having to work in different ways, and that's okay, and recognising that as part of that. We have done a survey of our bank staff as part of our recovery, but obviously through the themes that we've had through the Freedom to Speak Up route, we have had over 120 responses so far. We're continuing to analyse that to look at themes and trends, and then we will take any action from that as required. But just some assurance that we are continuing to listen to that group of staff as well, given the number of concerns that have seemed to come from that group of staff.
Okay.
We are continuing to talk to our staff and engage with staff. So we have got a pulse survey on the staff room every week. So it's got different questions each week to get a sense in lieu of the friends and family test not being available at the moment. And as I said, the staff support and wellbeing recovery cell that I'm leading, some of the work within that, looking at listening and engaging with teams, but we're also making sure we're engaged with very specific groups of staff. So our bank staff, we're also linked in and getting feedback from our medical staff and colleagues, but also staff who've been redeployed. So one of the actions that's being undertaken over the next few weeks is every member of staff who has been redeployed and is moving back to their usual service will be offered a stay conversation, a debrief, an opportunity to have some one-on-one time with somebody to talk about their experiences and help them as they return back to their more regular duties.
Yeah.
I believe
that's us.
That's it.
That's us.
Yeah. Krishna, did you want to pick up any of the questions?
Yeah, so I think we've picked up most of them so far, but I think there are a couple. So there's one from Janet. Is it still the case that the BMA nationally is advising members not to use Freedom to Speak Up?
Matt, do you know?
From the BMA, from the British Medical Association. Not that I know. I'll honestly say I wasn't aware of that advice. I think the engagement that we've had through our medical staffing colleagues has been very positive to date, and as I said, we'll continue to work with them directly. I think I was with the medical staffing committee on Monday this week talking about some of the work we're using in terms of recovery. So I think just having that connection directly with them, you know, hopefully that will support that going forward. But I will look into that a little bit further. I wasn't aware of that, Janet.
And do you just link to medical staff? Is there a link between the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian and the Guardian of Safer Working Hours and the whole sort of junior doctor support element?
Yeah.
That's
So in normal circumstances, I would do the junior doctor's induction. Obviously, that's been paused for the time being. I do link up closely with it's now Dr. Mann, but previous to that was Tim Millward, who remains one of our champions as well. So we're closely linked and working with medical colleagues.
great. Thank you, Matt. And hopefully that's a really positive reflection that actually there's really within the network of champions, there are really quite a representative group of people working with Matt to make sure that everyone feels that they can reach somebody that they're comfortable to talk to.
Just to pick up on, I think it's Neil's question around staff working more remotely, and one of the areas I link to as a non-exec, and I know Matt and I have had discussions about, is the staff who work for us in secured services like the prisons, and trying to promote a champions network. I mean, you know, from my meetings with that staff group and the managers out there, there is a, you know, they do speak up. We just want to sort of make sure the same support framework of champions is across those services as well, and that would have been a priority prior to lockdown, but we've been a bit, you know, stymied by not being able to go out there.
Yeah.
And we have had issues raised in those areas. I think the other thing I'd add is my understanding from particularly colleagues in HR is that the use of Microsoft Teams and others has actually broken down a lot of those barriers of accessibility. And I think with champions, getting people to volunteer to come out of prison, to come to one of the trust sites to engage with that, actually they're now better able to be engaged and feel closer to the organisation virtually, and that's opened a lot of doors. So I think there's some more work for us to do off the back of this, but I think there will be some positive engagement from them.
Yeah.
And I think probably worth sort of reflecting for people that perhaps in the end the most important thing is that it's about encouraging everyone to feel able to speak up. We're not concerned if large numbers of people speak up. That's a positive thing, not a negative thing. It's what we want to encourage, because if the people don't feel they can speak up, we can't fix the problem. If there is a particular problem that needs to be addressed. So it's all about encouraging people to feel that they can speak up in whatever way they feel comfortable. And that might be through Matt, that might be through one of the champions, that might be through their line manager. It's all of those things, isn't it?
And I think it might be a nuance, but actually our strategy is helping you to speak up, not just freedom to speak up. We're actively encouraging people to do that. So I think that was a very proactive and positive slant on things, really.
Yeah, excellent.
The last thing I was going to say, because I did say I'd provide two pieces of assurance. Obviously, the detailed log is what we see every time we meet. But every 6 months, we, as quality and governance, we pick at random. But obviously, considering some of the themes that are coming through, we pick a case and we actually ask for the team to do a deep dive on it so that we get an internal review process alongside all the data.
Great. Thank you very much, Moira, and thank you, Matt, for supporting that as well. Helpful to have both of you there. And no doubt, if colleagues are interested, we can, certainly share or update people on this item going forward. Okay, I'm conscious that we have another item on this section of our agenda, and that is an item regarding the Trust's recovery journey from COVID-19, and recovery has a very specific context within the COVID response, and I'm going to hand over at this point to Sandra, who you would have heard speaking earlier as our Deputy Chief Executive, and she's going to cover this item. So over to you, Sandra.
Thanks, Krishni. Richard or Tracy, I'm just checking technology-wise, am I showing the slides or are you?
Happy either way, Sandra. If you want us to do it, just say and we'll put them on the screen for you.
If you do it, then probably better because my technology doesn't do it very well. Or is that me? It's either me or the technology.
No problem. I will endeavour to get it up on the screen now. Just bear with me a second whilst I find the relevant file. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Richard. I'll say next slide when we get there. Is that all right? Thank you.
Fine.
Okay, just to give a little bit of context then, as we've heard from Angela's report, COVID-19 is obviously the biggest thing that we've had to deal with as an incident in the NHS, at least the 30 odd years that I've been working, and probably all the way back pre-NHS to the war, for the national effort that we've all put in. And I think it's fair to say pretty much in 1 week, we reconfigured the entirety of the service delivery from the trust, and a massive effort from everybody across the entire trust, but really the staff and the leadership in operations, to completely change from our normal way of delivering services to something completely different, but keep the vast majority of all the services, all the delivery, to be giving patients what we could at the right time, and making sure that we delivered the outcomes. So it has been a massive piece of work, but also that means that, of course, we have a massive amount to do when we're looking to recover services and to restore as much as possible, as quickly as possible, to our patients. So next slide, please, Richard. So this is a really busy slide. Apologies for that, and we'll share these as we will the other slides as well. This is really on one page our entire sort of strategic and operational response to both the initial incident and all the way through to what will be a complete reset and transition into the future, not knowing, of course, when this incident will close or when we will step down from our current level 4 major incident, critical incident that is set by the government. So just so everybody is aware, we are still in a command and control situation, which means that there are certain things that we have to do through the Incident Control Centre, and it is not back in any way to business as normal. But even though we're now sort of 14 or 15 weeks in, we are starting to take steps to try and integrate back into business as usual. And this is the programme of work that we started really within 2 or 3 weeks of actually moving into the incident to begin with. So we started thinking about recovery really quickly. So initially, we focused on how do we respond, how do we support our staff, our service users, as well as we possibly could. What could we keep going, how could we deliver the outcomes, and how could we make sure that we kept everything as safe as possible. We're now moving into phase 2, which has been called Managing Through the Crisis, and we're nudging up from phase 2 actually into phase 3, even though we are still in a level 4 incident. But really looking and really done a massive piece of work over the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks to understand at every service level across all of our functions across the trust, what is it that actually worked really well? What were the opportunities that we took? And I'll give you a really good example of how we use technology. This meeting is an absolute example of how we're doing things differently, that we want to lock in and make sure that we keep. And there's quite a lot of that we've learnt about, and that we're really looking at how we take that next step to make sure that we continue with the things that have gone really well, but also really understand what it is that we need to not do, what is it that we need to get back to, what is it that we need to recover and restore. At the same time, as we've said, constantly managing our daily incident response. We still have, Richard knows this, he does it very often for us, we still have 4 or 5, 6 situation reports that we have to get in by 11 o'clock every morning. We still have national guidance that comes in daily that we have to respond to. So we're constantly having to manage the incident, keep going on that daily rhythm, whilst starting to think about restoring the services and looking at what's really, what do we want the future to look like in both a COVID world for probably the next 9 to 12 months, but also after that. what is the vision and how are we going to meet it? Making sure, of course, we always work with our system partners. We think about our stakeholders. We've worked incredibly closely with staff side, especially around how to keep services safe when we bring them back. So that's not just about the risk assessments for the staff that we've talked about, but also how do we make sure that our environment is safe, that we have the right level of PPE, that we keep social distancing, that we make sure our staff and our patients, as they come back into our buildings, are as safe as they possibly can be. And that's a really big piece of work that Jean and our health and safety team and our operational colleagues are working on literally every day. Keeping on with the pace of the incident and making sure that we respond to national guidance. And it's been a challenge. A lot of guidance has come out in the early days that has then changed, and we've had to relook at how we've done everything. And often that can be it always comes in on Friday at 5 p.m. So it's usually a quick turnaround over a weekend and looking to implement new guidance on a Monday morning. Take the next slide, please, Richard. Thank you. So what is it that the Strategic Recovery Group will do? That's the Strategic Recovery Group. It's a group that I chair that we meet every week. And it really is about making sure that all of the functions of the trust are aware of what everybody else is doing, what do operations need to deliver the services, and how do we make sure that we do everything in the best possible way. So it's an overarching group with different cells looking at different aspects of the functions that we want to restore and look at what the transition and the transformation may be. So first of all, as I said, we have to clearly understand where are we right now, what did we start, what did we learn, and what are the risks and the issues that we've had to solve, but also maybe coming in the horizon. A lot of horizon scanning about risk and how we make sure that we mitigate them. Sharing our learning across the system and sharing nationally. Actually, we've been sharing a lot across all of our mental health trusts, other community trusts, working in the East Midlands as an alliance, definitely in Northamptonshire across all of the providers and social care, but also with our voluntary sector partners, really doing a lot of that analysis and system learning and sharing. And then really clearly getting that plan of what do we need to do to get to the new future. Next step, please. Next slide, please, Richard. And then delivering, making sure that it's safely delivered in a governance structure that works in the new world. So we've got a group with Angela chairing, Strategic Gold, that we share with Leicester as well. With, again, a lot of the sharing has been with other trusts, and that's really held us in good stead. It's mean that we've taken all of the learning about what people have done first, or what have they done better, or what have we done better, and we've made sure that we've been stealing ideas generously to get us into the right place. And making sure that the executive board and then through a weekly flash report to trust board that reporting mechanism has continued, and they're done through highlight reports and escalating any issues that we need that real senior level leadership input to make sure that we've got things right. And as I said, moving into the next phase, making sure that we've got that oversight, that we really get to make sure that what we do fits with our strategy and it really doesn't impact. In fact, it may actually enhance our well-led and our outstanding status that we are so keen to keep and build on. Next slide, please, Richard. So again, this is really busy. We won't go through all this. It's just to give you a flavour of the cells that are working under the recovery group. So operations, obviously the biggest part of the trust, the busiest part that really has the functions of the whole trust supporting how we deliver our services safely, how we get them back to be all of the pre-COVID levels. Might be in a different way, but really meeting that demand that we have. Really supporting the staff and making sure that our clinical quality, safeguarding that Angela has talked about, that we have plans in place to mitigate any of the risk and do this safely, but of really high quality as well. Next slide, please, Richard. This is, I said, operations is where the big piece of work is going to be. This is where we deliver all of our services to patients. So we have plans for every single service line. That's well over 100 plans in great detail. The analysis of what was the performance pre-March the 23rd, what's been the performance levels and the issues that have happened since then, and how we're looking at how we move out of that into what we expect to happen and the trajectories that we'll need to build and we'll need to work to get back to getting those outcomes where we want them to be. And that's everything from what's the furniture we use, how do we manage virtual clinics, what technology do we need to use, and then how do we set up face-to-face contacts in and out of the home. Lots of our services haven't changed. I think it's really important that we say that. Services like the intermediate care teams, district nursing, mental health have really continued where necessary to do face-to-face visits in a really safe way, but get that care out to people where they need it. We've opened up new services. For example, we had closed last week in Favel House. We had services there for patients stepping down out of hospital that were COVID positive and needed a safe place to be before they could be discharged back to their normal residence. And that was a really incredible piece of work by staff who'd been redeployed from all parts of the trust, came together in Favel and delivered a really high quality service and got some really good feedback. And the staff really enjoyed doing something different. So again, the details, people want it, we'll get these slides out there, but every single service is just to say, have a plan of what did they learn, what do they need to do next, and what steps do they have to take to get there safely. Next slide, please, Richard. And this is just a flavour. Of course, we're not an island. We work with everybody else in the system. So we have a system recovery cell as well, chaired by the CCG. And what they're concentrating on really hard is, again, the restoration of really key top priority services. And a lot of these priorities are set nationally around, obviously, cancer and the real high priority services for patients. How do we make sure that we get patients through our hospitals efficiently and make sure that we maintain enough beds that if we have a surge in Northamptonshire, we come towards a second peak, that everything we learned about how we manage to keep that bed use as effective as possible, that we're able to put back in as quickly and keep that flow going so that patients are only in hospital for as long as they need to. A lot of outpatients, our outpatients, but also the outpatients in the acute hospitals have been done remotely. You'll know a lot of, most of GP appointments are now being done remotely. So what have we gained out of that? What have we learned and what do we need to keep? And the two big buckets for us really, the integrated care with primary and community care, how do we get that moving again and reinvigorated around primary care networks? And our mental health, our delivery of the long-term plan for mental health, which we've really continued our collaborative working across all of our voluntary care sector partners while this has been going on. We've looked at lots of different things around trauma and how we manage to really build those services, build the wellbeing offer that we have for the system so that mental health is in place, that we can deliver what we need to do as we come out of the initial part of the incident. So that's a quick flavour. I'm sure there are questions, but I'll leave it there and wait to see if anybody's got any questions for me.
So, Sandra, there are indeed questions for you. So I think the first person who wanted to ask a question was Janet. So I'm hoping that we can bring Janet in. Janet can unmute herself if she wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible just quickly to go back to slide 6, please? So, Richard.
I'll let Richard do the technology thing.
Just bear with me a moment, I'll get it back up on the screen. Apologies. It was slide number 6, Janet, was it okay?
All
right.
Sorry, I didn't realise it'd be such a...
No, don't worry. Was it this one?
Next one. Yes, sorry, this one. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. What I wanted to say, first of all, I wanted to congratulate Sandra because this looks to me a very impressive piece of work. Clearly, a lot of thought has gone into it, and it's a big operation to get this sort of back on the road. But my question really is about adult services. The focus is to re-establish full service delivery in, and there are 3 services there, and 2 of them, the continence service and the falls service, are services which my clients in my benefits work have found well, mostly haven't known about at all. And when they have known about it, they found it very difficult to access. So my question really, and of course the numbers of staff involved, the full service particularly, is very small prior to lockdown. So my question really, what I'm leading up to, is there any hope that in the future we may not only re-establish full service delivery, but actually make it better, improve it, and make it more accessible to elderly people in particular in the community?
Thanks, Janet. And I'll bring Jean in, I think, because she's got far more detail about the operational services. But I think it's really important to say none of these services stopped completely. We've looked at different ways that we could deliver them. And as a physiotherapist myself, I would have said before COVID that doing a lot of these things is impossible remotely, but it is astonishing how much you can do through video technology and talking through people through exercises and things like that. But I think you're right. We're not in complete control if what's commissioned from us, but this has given us the ability to work probably a lot closer as a system, and we really have seen the system work a lot closer together over the last few months, and we have to build on those relationships to get these issues across. But as far as the details concerned, Jean, I don't know if you want to come in and give any detail around any commissioning decisions or discussions that we've been having.
So yeah, I mean, obviously the commission discussions have sort of taken a bit of on the back foot over the last 4 months due to the pressures in other areas. The continence service have continued to deliver throughout the entire pandemic. They've actually worked very closely along with our community nursing team to ensure that they're actually getting out more into the community. So they are seeing our contacts actually, interestingly, for the service have been increased for the continence service over the period. I think there are and have been ongoing conversations before this around the urology pathway in its entirety, particularly around the continence service and how we can work in a more vertical manner with colleagues in secondary care and primary care, and increase the training to our community nurses. So that is work that has started, Janet, and will continue. I think the full service is something that we are all have had conversations about before in terms of what's commissioned through NCC. And again, there was meant to be a big workshop that was taking place in the end of March looking at the full service, which had to be postponed. So I believe they are trying to get dates in now for September to reinvigorate that piece of work. So of course I'll keep you posted on progress with that.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Sandra. I'm guessing that when we start talking in more earnest about frailty, that falls will feature to some degree as part of that in any case. So hopefully, yeah. Great. Okay, there are a couple of other sort of comments and questions. Thank you, Janet, for yours. Neil has asked, can I ask, please, service recovery is not just about resurrecting old services and developing new, it's also about management of backlogs. What assurance is there for backlogs to be addressed as well as meeting new and emerging needs?
Again, I'm going to let Jean come in.
Okay, so you're absolutely right, Neil. It's about making sure that we are maintaining the services that we're providing and we're doing it to the best we possibly can. So we do have a monitoring process that I and the two director of ops undertake on a weekly basis. That's we go through all of 103 service lines to look at the both the activity, the waiting lists, and the referral demand coming in to see if we've got a ballooning problem in any particular area. In fact, in some of our services, it's actually improved our waiting list times because our colleagues that are working from home have been able to do more and more activity, albeit virtually. So that's something that we won't want to lose going forward, and we're really hoping that we'll be able to maintain the waiting list in some of our services through that means. So we are monitoring and checking it, and what we've done in terms of priority of bringing services back, because as Sandra has explained, it is incredibly complicated to bring a service back into this current environment. We have prioritised those that have got waiting lists that are growing. So, for example, some of our children's services, a lot of the assessments are undertaken in schools, and we haven't been able to do that. So we are seeing growing waiting lists in that areas, I'm having to think of a different way of doing some of the assessments rather than wait until September. So it is very complicated, but we do monitor it every single week with a fine magnifying glass over all those lines.
Thanks, Jean. So obviously that's not something we can sort of provide full assurance around, because it's the nature of the situation that actually we're not going to be as productive or as efficient in some instances, although maybe in others that we will be. But we'll no doubt can keep people informed about that. Wendy has just commented really about making sure that the planning for the future will have a focus on health inequalities, I think linked to Angela's comment earlier, and also particularly the BAME inequalities that have been highlighted. I think this is certainly something that the NHCP and Director of Public Health will pick up, I think, won't it? Sandra, do you want to comment? Or? Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, and it's back to opportunities and seizing the opportunities that this has highlighted a lot that we may have been aware of in the past, but we haven't been given particular priority attention to. And I think seizing that opportunity now is something that we need to be held to account for as a system, because it's become a priority, and especially in the mental health, we haven't called it just the mental health work stream. What we've called it is the population health work stream with initial priority of mental health, and that's about bringing together those communities, and that's why it's been so key that we've kept the engagement work going over the last 3 months throughout the COVID incident. So the collaboration and the stakeholder group that we have running with our service users and our carers has continued. So a lot of the feedback we've been getting has been from people on the ground about what it's felt for them. So that we've been bringing back into our recovery planning, but we need to go further. It's not just about our current patients and our current service users. And Angela and I actually had a conversation this morning about understanding the population needs and how we bring that much higher up the agenda. So I haven't got the answers. All I can say is it's something that the conversation has started on.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Chris Davison asked whether recovery plans covered physical health, including dental and podiatry, which I kind of went, yes, it does. But I just wanted to confirm that was right, and that I haven't misled Chris, but that's fine. And Paul Joy, we're told by government there's an increase in mental health during the lockdown, but do we have any information regarding an increase in drug usage? Interesting question.
I don't know. I would have to take that away.
Okay, we'll make a note of that. Thanks, Paul, for raising that. It might be something to explore through the Health and Wellbeing Board, or certainly by Lucy as Director of Public Health. And finally, Chris Smith-Haynes, who was our Partner Governor for NCC, just commented that her experience of the continence and physio teams during lockdown has been wonderful. When people need to be seen, they are seen, and telephone contact has been used effectively. So that's good. And I think that is interesting, isn't it? Quite a lot of people, not everybody clearly, but a lot of people have found it in a way more accessible, some services more accessible by the changes that have been made. But of course, they don't always work for everybody, and that's part of what we're constantly having to look at. Thank you so much, Sandra and Jean, for comments as well, for those additional points. It's going to be something we are, I think, again, continuing to focus on as time goes on, because this isn't a short piece of work, is it? It's months in the progress. So no doubt we'll be updating as we go. But it links very nicely to the next session that we were going to do for governors, because actually one of the things that Sandra alluded to around the whole sort of recovery piece was, it's not just, it's about services, of course, but it's also about things like corporate governance. You know, what does the new world that we're in look like in the months to come between now and March, and also beyond, because actually we might need to be operating somewhat differently, recognising the sort of the safety aspects of COVID being with us for some time to come, and all the changes that the NHS might be going through at the same time. So what we wanted to do now is have a sort of fairly, let's say, a relaxed conversation, and it is really just a conversation, a starting point to say, what might that mean for the Council of Governors and our arrangements around the Council of Governors? And interestingly, we had a very similar discussion with the board, and in a board workshop that we had around, well, what does this mean for board and board governance? So we'd like to take this opportunity to just have that kind of conversation with you all. And as I say, importantly say, it is just a start of a conversation, not a conclusion. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Richard to just explain what we're going to do. So, Richard.
Thanks very much, Krishna. Yes, and at the risk of quoting Monty Python, and now for something completely different. So what we're trying to do now really is move away from the sort of more broadcast and relaying information to you mode to the next section of the session, where we're really looking to get lots and lots of feedback from you. So really the important thing to say is this is just the start of the conversation. We appreciate not everybody necessarily likes using Teams and can get to grips with some of the technology, so there'll be lots of other opportunities to contribute to this discussion. And equally, we're keen to capture people that might not be here today to get their thoughts and feedback. I will reference some of the materials that were shared before the workshop. Before I do that, I can see Fiona's got her hand up, so I'll just bring her in quickly before we get started.
I just wondered, because this is a little bit of a high energy session and we're going to be doing this for about an hour 45 minutes. I just wondered if we perhaps needed to just check to see if anybody needed a quick break before we got into it, so we can be really focused and concentrate on it. I just wondered if that might be okay for the group, if we perhaps vote for five minutes or so.
Thank you, Fiona. Sam has voted with a definite yes then, and I can see a few other thumbs up. So why don't we take a really helpful suggestion? Thank you, Fiona. Why don't we take 5 minutes, grab a cup of tea, stretch your legs a bit, and we'll kickstart at sort of just at 46 minutes past 2 to be precise. So see you very shortly. Do move away from the screen because it helps, I think. Sorry, I've got a cat arriving, which is somewhat unfortunate. A wet cat has just arrived on my. I'm going to turn the screen off for a moment to do. Right. Sorry about that. I have deposited the wet cat outside the door. So okay, I can see that we haven't quite got everybody back, but I think we do need to crack on, Richard.
Okay. In which case, I think we were going to start with a bit of an icebreaker anyway, just to check that people are comfortable with the technology. So I guess as we're doing that, others will return with a caffeinated beverage of some description, I suspect. So if I could ask people to find the chat function on their Microsoft Teams applications. If you haven't used chat before, it's the icon that's called, I think it's actually called Meeting Chat, but it's certainly in the menu bar at the bottom, and it's either chat or show conversation, and that should then bring up a menu of all of the chat that's happened so far in the meeting. Right at the bottom, you should then find a type a new message option, which is how you can put a message on, which will then be viewable to everybody in the meeting. So if I could ask you to, this is a little bit of a curveball, but if I could ask you to type into the chat box what you had for breakfast this morning. And we'll just see that people can use the chat function. It could be that you didn't have any breakfast, of course, but the purpose of the activity is just to, oh yes, quite a few people that didn't have breakfast. Okay. Toast of Marmite, very nice. I should say, incidentally, that we were testing out the polling function actually within Microsoft Teams. We were hoping to do a bit like they do on some of the big TV shows where you can push a button and put a vote in. We haven't quite got that working yet, so we are reliant on the chat function. Okay, so I'm
sorry, Richard, but on a serious note, I just wanted to mention that Neil has commented that Marmite is evil. But I think I better not say any more than that.
Getting a very political territory, aren't we, with breakfast choices? Yes. That seems a bit of a theme with toast and cereal. Yeah. Oh, some fruit coming up here as well. Nothing. Okay. We started a bit of a Marmite argument. Okay, quickly, let's move on. but at least I think we've established that most people can use the chat, which is good actually, because that's the primary mechanism we're going to use at least for the next part of this session.
Richard, I can't use it.
Okay, John. Well, if there are people like John that can't use it, if you could put your hand up, we will certainly bring you in, and you can certainly speak during the exercise. So I don't know whether you were coming in, John, to talk to us about your breakfast choices, but flippancy aside, if you were just signalling that you can't use the chat, as I say, if you want to put your hand up or interject, we'll certainly bring you into the discussion. So thank you for flagging that, actually. Okay, so I mentioned just before our break that I was going to reference the paper that was circulated with the rest of the papers. I think it was labelled paper E. In some ways, it felt a little bit like homework, so I do apologise for that. But it was really more intended as a stimulus piece, really, to get you all thinking about some ideas for this session. So I guess it plays to those of us that might be more introverted. So I think Sandra, as you might expect, set the scene really well in talking to us a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that have been presented to us as NHFT, and equally that to us as individuals and our families, really, that through the COVID-19 pandemic. And she talked a little bit about how now that we're getting used to COVID being normal, well, what does that next phase of normal actually look like? And as Krishni was saying, we heard a little bit about how some of the operational services have started to get to grips with COVID-19 to continue to deliver really great services to people across Northamptonshire. And this session really is then to start thinking about, so what does the next normal look like for governance? So the system we use to run the organisation, and then more specifically, So what does that mean for the Council of Governors and for all of you as governors in your various different constituencies? So what we wanted to do really is to start to think about what we should continue doing. So things that we've been doing prior to COVID that are working really well. Those things that we should potentially start doing as we go forward, and equally potentially those things that we should stop doing as we progress forward. So just to set a little bit of context before we start to have that discussion. As you probably will have noticed, and I think Sandra or maybe Angela actually mentioned, we are in the national control within the NHS. So although the government has stepped down the level of alert, I suppose, for the country from level 4 to level 3, we are still very much in level 4 in terms of the NHS response to the incident. So that effectively means that we are still being given a lot of instruction from the national team about what we should and shouldn't be doing. And what that means in terms of the governance context is that we had some key guidance that came out just at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it was called something like reducing burden, which gave us some directions on whether we should or shouldn't be having face-to-face meetings, should be running public meetings and so forth. And that conditioned what we did in terms of both the Council of Governors, but also in terms of the board up until now. And much of that guidance is still in situ as we go forward. I should say we've recently had some guidance, and by recently I mean on Tuesday, so not Friday this time, as Sandra was saying, but Tuesday this week had some new guidance that fundamentally doesn't change a lot of the guidance on not having face-to-face public meetings, but it does ask us to consider, given that we've now got to grips with some of the virtual technologies such as Microsoft Teams that we're using now, whether we can start to reintroduce some of the things that would have been face-to-face previously, such as our general meeting, whether we could reintroduce that in a virtual environment. So part of today's conversation with you as governors will start to inform, well, what are we going to do then, as we've got some new opportunities through some of these virtual mediums. The other thing to say is, of course, that this is a changeable picture. What's good today might not be good tomorrow. So we're going to have to continue to have conversation, continue to adjust as we go forward. So it's by no means the case that what we decide today will be it for the next foreseeable future. It will essentially inform just the next normal phase of operation. So I guess then to frame the conversation that we're about to have, it's probably worth reflecting on. So what are the core statutory duties really for councils of governors and equally governors individually? And we set this out in the paper, and I'm sure, without wishing to patronise anybody, most of you as governors will already know these very, very well. The two key statutory duties, of course, for governors are firstly representing the interests of members of the trust and the interests of the public. Now, again, we have, I think, around 12,000 members of NHFT. These are from various different constituencies. Some are service users, some are members of the public, and some are partners. But all of these people have an interest in what NHFT does. And really it's the job of governors for various different constituencies to represent the interests of those members in terms of how the trust does its business. So setting strategy, but also transacting that strategy in delivering better care for patients. So the first key statutory duty for governors is to bring forward the voice of those members to the trust and really influence trust decision making and trust service delivery to meet the needs of those members. And so the second statutory duty, again, we've talked about before, is holding the non-exec directors to account. So of course, Moira was talking earlier on, providing some assurance in this respect, but holding non-exec directors individually and collectively account to the performance of the board of directors. And when we talk about the performance of the board of directors, what we're really talking about is the board of directors delivering its strategy, in our case, in being a leading provider of outstanding compassionate care for our patients. And we've got some other statutory duties for the Council of Governors, which we'll perhaps come on to a little bit later on, because I'm conscious we don't want to get too much into presentation mode again. We want to get some interaction going from you within the meeting. So with that in mind, if we start first then with thinking about representing the interests of members, if I could ask you to, in the chat box, and we'll bring people in, as I appreciate not everybody can use the chat box, just to think about, given what we're doing up to COVID, I suppose, really, in terms of representing the interests of members on a scale of 1 to 5. So if 1 being poor and 5 being great, how would you rate what we do as an organisation and what you do as governors in representing members and the public within NHFT? So if I could ask you just to rate, just a simple 1 to 5, how are we doing on this at the moment? 1 being poor, 5 being great. Just be interested in getting your feedback. So Sam's asking, can I clarify if I mean generally or currently? So if we think about representing the interests of members up to the point the COVID pandemic came in, I think that would be a good starting point.
Richard, the one challenge I can see for newer governors, that might be harder to comment on because they would have started since the pandemic.
That's a very good point. So for those, yeah, so let's see what we get in first for the people that come up to the point of the pandemic, and then we'll bring others in. I can see Fiona's got a hand up, so I'll ask Fiona to come in at this point too.
I'm just wondering if, because I agree, Krishna, it is quite difficult for those who've joined us during the pandemic, but it might actually be quite an interesting idea to ask where we might want to be, you know, as a way forward, because I'm sure that we could all contribute to having a vision of where we might want to be on that scale of 1 to 5.
And Zoe, I think, would like to come in there. Zoe?
Hi everyone. Sorry you can't see me. I really just can't get my video working. But yeah, good discussion. Just yeah, no, it's just really about that is interesting to me. How do we actually engage the members or the public? You know, that's just something that I'm going to learn as we go along, I'm sure. But I really would value hearing how people are doing that currently in their areas. Thank you.
Thanks, and I think that's a really useful suggestion. So I think, yes, let's bring in some ideas and suggestions from people. So before I do that, I'll just have a look at some of the scores that are coming in. So we've got actually a reasonable range of scores here. So I think generally, without being too scientific about it, we've got lots of 3s and 4s I can see, but equally some saying 2, suggesting actually we've got some room for improvement. So before I comment on some of that, I might just I think I saw Nikki's hand go up, and then I'll come to Janet next. So Nikki, if I could bring you in first.
Thank you. Just a quick point. I thought, Chris, when we had our last M&G, that we had talked about having new governors having some kind of training in how to engage with their members and so on, and things that we could do, and not just what they were, but actually how you go about doing them, which I think we all agreed would be really, really useful.
Can I reply?
By all means, Chris, please do.
Yeah, thank you. You're absolutely right, Nikki. The membership and governance group, we identified that in terms of fulfilling our role in representing not just members and the public, governors might not necessarily feel comfortable or confident. We use the links that we have as individual governors, and that differs as we are a very, should I say, broad church. But as we look to embed and to be consistent with our member and community engagement, we did recognise the need for training. For example, giving some scenarios. Richard, you and I were talking about some. Nikki, you're absolutely right, and we'd look to do that as a workshop basis. I mean, Helen during lockdown has come up with a proposal about engaging with schools, you know, which is again utilising her links and networks. But I do believe that that is still the case, that we would need to look to train and equip governors. And if I could just reinforce that point, in the PPI strategy, the patient and public involvement strategy, there is a distinct line in there that talks about training and equipping governors to give them the skills, the tools to represent the public and the members more confidently. So that is aligned with the PPI strategy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I might come back to you in a moment for some comments on some of the ways that we're doing engagements at the moment, as that's coming up in the chat box as an area of interest. Whilst I let you think about that, I'll come to, I think Janet had her hand up. So Janet, if I could bring you in. Janet, would you like to come in? Oh, I think you're on mute, Janet. So
Do apologise, and I froze earlier too, so I got a bit muddled up. But it seems to me that there are two distinct elements to this. There's the element of how individual governors represent their constituency, and that is very important. And I absolutely agree that training is important and is valuable. Governwell does a very good short course on this, which a number of us have been on, and the message basically that you get from Governwell is everywhere you go, every group with which you mix, you listen and take soundings, so that whether it's a church group, a WI, a bowls club, or whatever it is, you use them as a source of information on experiences of trust services, and you build up that sort of knowledge. Now, the caveat to that, and I personally think this is very important, is that although we have a wide range of experience on the governors, we are overwhelmingly, well, I shouldn't say overwhelmingly, quite a number of us are elderly, and quite a number of us are white, and overwhelmingly, I would suggest, we're middle class. So there is a danger that the groups to which we belong will mirror our own experience. So that whereas that Governwell approach of using all your contacts, including your neighbours, to get feedback on services, what's needed and what's missing, all that's important, but it's also important, I think, to make strenuous efforts to go beyond our own immediate community and link in with others. Now, in East Northants, for example, we've got the East Northants Locality Patient Engagement Group, which is supported by the CCG, and that group has got a link with a local high school. So if there is something, or if we think we ought to find out what young people think about something, we can go and ask the school. We're never going to get young people en masse to come to a meeting or be interested in health, but we can ask specific services. So there's the two things really, the using the groups that you're in yourself, and also going beyond that and stretching out and trying to make contact with people who have different backgrounds and different experiences. But, and this is the second part of this, that's what the governor does. But there is also what the trust does. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, you could work your socks off doing all the things I've been talking about. But unless there is a way, a meaningful way of feeding that into the thinking and decision making of the trust, then we are wasting our time. So I can't, I'm sorry, we've got to find a way of linking up. And I think the trust as a whole has gone backwards on this, because a few years ago, we used to have an annual meeting for members when on the annual plan, Richard will remember this, because I can remember that you used to front it on occasions. And members came along and they talked about all sorts of things which had nothing whatever to do with the annual plan, but they had a chance to let off steam and say what they think. Now, we don't do that anymore. I think that's a pity. The other thing that we used to have years ago is members' meetings from time to time on a topic of an evening. We'd have a speaker, and Alex did a very good one some years ago at Berrywood, a really interesting talk on mental health, well attended by members and appreciated by members. So I would put in a plea, well, let's look at what we used to do and see if we can bring some of that back. But also, and more fundamentally, let's look at how we can use what individual governors representing the public and members, what their feedback is, how we can get that into the trust, decision making and thinking and planning. Sorry to go on so long, but it's something I feel strong about.
Absolutely. No, thanks very much indeed, Janet. A number of really key points there, actually. And I think one of the things that really struck me, which I think harmonises with something I saw, I think it was Paul Joy. I'm sorry, I'm pointing in this direction, but of course you can't see my screen, can you? Something that Paul Joy, I think, was raising in the meeting chat. Of course, it's not just about members, it's about the whole population. And one of the points that you were talking about there that really resonated with me was that point about, well, actually, are we reaching all members within our communities? And actually, of course, we all as individuals have certain connections, but are we really connecting with everybody across the population effectively? And I think that's a really thought-provoking mechanism. Of course, we all bring certain ideas and suggestions, but actually there's probably something about extending our reach that's important about our vision. And I think another important point that you raised, at least for me, of many, of course, was that point about, well, let's not reinvent the wheel. And that's, again, part of the exercise. Let's continue doing some of the things that are working, or resurrect things that we've done before that have been really value added, rather than necessarily just going about after new things. So I'd like to ask Chris in just a moment to feed in some ideas that have come through M&G and some experiences around some of the things we're currently doing. And I think picking up on a point that was also in the chat, to bring in some of our newer governors, really, that of course have been members and are just stepping into the governor territory. What's been your experience, I guess, before you became a governor, of member engagement? Actually, I'd be interested to get some thoughts from you about that. So, Chris, with your permission, I might hand to you to get some ideas about what's currently happening in terms of member engagement within NHFT.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I was just reflecting on Janet's points, which are well made, in terms of we do need to be far more consistent, perhaps, in our approach. I think just as a bit of historical background is that, yes, we have a legal duty to represent members, but under the 2012 Health and Social Care Act, that was extended to the public. And in one sense, it's very black and white. We represent them, but how do we make that meaningful? How do we add value? We had a PPI strategy, which I referenced earlier, patient and public involvement, which was a plan on a page, because for me and for the rest of the M&G and the council, membership cannot be seen in isolation. So membership is one level, it's a tiered approach. That might lead to consultation. So for example, if we were making changes to learning disability service, you might wish to be involved in that. That leads to what the phrase is co-production or involvement. That can lead to volunteering and in some cases lead to employment. So it's a tiered approach. So I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that membership is not just in isolation. The second point I'd like to make, please, is that out of the PPI strategy, the M&G group recommended to the full council, which was subsequently agreed, that our priorities for 2020-21 would be three things. It would be equality, diversity and inclusion. It would be children and young people and working adults. And I'll go through them if I may. I recognise that I'm a white leader. I recognise that we need to make sure that our membership and our Council of Governors is more diverse and representative of the communities we serve. And I want to intentionally move to that direction. And it does mean using our links, like say, for example, Ranjit with Wendy, about how do we get to talk to, shall we say, those more hard to reach groups. Secondly, children and young people. I agree, apart from Chelsea, we have no one who represents young people. And it's certainly an ambition of mine that just like Health Watch has a youth advisory board, that we also have, for example, a youth advisory board for the council. just thinking that through. Half of the services we provide are for children. And finally, working adults. And this is where I think we need to go in terms of the community in the future. And thank you for bearing with me, but I'll just conclude with this, is that employers will increasingly look for help to signpost them to services. There is evidence to show that for every £1 you spend on emotional mental well-being, you get a £4 return on that investment through improved productivity, reduced sickness and absence, reduced presenteeism, and improved recruitment and retention rates. And post-COVID, I firmly believe that employers will be looking for help. I went to talk to Loke about signposting them. Small employer, 150 staff. They only have one HR manager, but we're looking for help to support their employee base with mental health issues. And this was pre-lockdown. So I think there are examples, as Janet quite rightly reminded us, the great work she does with PEG, that John Walker, to spare his blushes, the links he has with the Rotary Club. You know, I've been doing work with the library, hosting health and wellbeing fairs, so that we can make sure that we provide something. We have to go to the public. They will not come to us. They're not going to come to us. We need to make it meaningful. We need to add value. And I would suggest we do need to do some training. We need to think through what that will look like. But particularly representing our constituencies, wherever that be, whether it be patient care, is taking, if you like, what we can offer to them when society will have to do so. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. I can see that Neil has his hand up. So if I could bring Neil in.
Thank you. I was frantically typing, so I didn't forget what I was going to say. So forgive me if I appear to be distracted. Janet said something that really resonated with me, which is around about, it's almost about the language and the style that you use to engage with people. I was, in my previous role, did a seminar where we were talking about engagement, and I looked around the room and we were surrounded by people of my age, my length of service in the organisation that I represented, and was representing people coming into our service who were 18, 19, 20 years old. And I made the point that I don't understand their culture, I don't understand their language, we have different values, we have different experiences outside of the workplace. So just because we're from within the same organisation doesn't mean I can communicate effectively with them. I was thrown out of that meeting for saying something that was almost heresy, but the point is really valid. We can't assume that just because we're good communicators that we know how to communicate with everyone. And the other point I was going to make was, I agree with what Chris has said. You can't expect people to come to us. We have to be outreaching and go to the people. And if you want to be truly inclusive, you understand that not everyone has the time to come to us, not everybody has the financial means to come to us, and not everybody can juggle all of the other life experiences and life demands and pressures to enable them to do that. So when you look at all of that, I think training is important, but I think we need to put the horse before the cart and not put the cart before the horse. So I would love you to train me, but I would like it to be the right training. So I think we need to understand what we want to communicate, how we want to do communication, and what that looks like, and then deliver a training package that is enabling rather than just do something for the sake of doing it because we think it's the right thing to do. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil. Some really interesting thoughts there. And I think what struck me about what you were saying was that point about listening to the point of understanding, really. So not sort of assuming, well, we're from the same bracket, therefore we know what the other person needs. Actually, that point about really taking the opportunity to engage in it in a deep way, so that we get get an understanding of what people want and how they want to engage with us. And I think you're right, actually, designing then our approach around what we've learned from that interaction, I think is really important, actually. So thank you. I think that's a really thoughtful point. And I was just going to say, actually, I can see the chat room buzzing, which is great, but it does mean equally that I'm missing loads of great ideas that are coming through. So just rest assured, if I'm not pulling out your particular contribution, that the chat is available to us afterwards. So we will be looking through all of these ideas and suggestions that are coming through, and we'll make those available to people after the meeting. So I asked also about people's experience sort of prior to becoming a governor, I guess, really trying to bring in some other newer governors just to get a sense of what your experience of NHFT before you became a governor was. And I can see in the chat box a few people had said, well, I hadn't really heard of being a member and so forth. Is any of our other newer governors wishing to come in and just share some of their experience of being a member and engagement with NHFT? Okay. So I can't see any hands going up. That's fine. Oh, is that Fiona? Are you looking to come in?
Yes, I can say that I hadn't really heard of membership before I became a governor. I remember it being mentioned in one meeting of the associate managers of Berrywood. Something I probably will look at rectifying in the future as well. But really, I'd never really heard of it. I think there's probably some more work. Certainly, I know there's some more work that I can do there because I do attend a lot of meetings around the county. So it's something I do have in mind for the future.
Thank you. And I think that's another interesting point, certainly that I know I've talked about with Dion, our communications director, which is to what extent do people actually know about NHFT? In the sense that a lot of conversations I've had, people know about the NHS and they talk about emergency departments, they talk about GPs, but actually when it's, have you heard about NHFT? Actually, surprisingly, although we're clearly an outstanding organisation providing great care locally, lots of people actually haven't heard of what we do. So in addition to being a member, there may be also a question about actually, do people know about NHFT? So I can see, I think Neil's got his hand up again, so I'll bring Neil in.
Yeah, I'm not wishing to be greedy or anything. So, but on that point, I think there's a real issue there, because I saw the role of governor. It was advertised on the website, and I'm a service user, so I'm kind of engaged with the trust anyway. And then Tracy very kindly told me I can't stand to be a governor because I'm not a member. And then I thought, well, what does it mean to be a member? And then when you, Richard, said there were 12,000 members, that kind of, I sat here quite surprised, because what does it mean to be a member? What does a member do? And how does that conduit actually work in a meaningful and insightful way? So the point of saying what I'm saying is a member a meaningful body that has a designated important role to do, or is it something that we have because we have to have them? And whichever one of the two it is, I think there needs to be something that actually connects the member to the organisation and the member to the governors, so you have that real meaningful flow. And I'd never heard of them, and as I sit here in this role to represent people, I don't know how that actually physically works or virtually works in a modern world as we move forward. So I'm a little lost around that. Is the truth of it, and I'm sure the fuzzy haze will become more clear as I go through this journey of discovery.
Thanks very much, Neil, and I'm smiling in part also because this is a conversation we had in our team within corporate affairs. Actually, what is a member, and what's the benefit of being one? And actually, have we been clear with people what the benefits are to them for being a member within NHFT? I'm not sure necessarily we have. So I think it's a really well made point, actually. And I just wanted to say before I bring Fiona in, I had noticed that I think Wendy was trying to come in as well. So if I go to Fiona first, then to Wendy, and I think then somebody else had their hand up as well. So Fiona, over to you first.
Thanks, Richard. So I partly put my hand up to make sure that we saw that Wendy was trying to get in. So that's good that she's coming in next. But I'm sort of sensing that there might be a bit of a group here. There might be a bit of a theme starting to emerge, so that we might need to look at membership. You know, so what is the ask and offer? What does it mean to be a member? What should we be communicating to members? And I'm just thinking, because part of what we're doing today is to start to think about some next steps and where do we take things forward. I wonder if we just sort of hold that thought. Do we need a bit of a virtual group, perhaps a task and finish group, to think about membership?
I think it's a really good idea, Fiona, and I guess this is probably where we could deploy the chat function again to see if people think that would be a good idea. I can see a few thumbs up, but I'm conscious I can't see everybody regrettably on my screen. So if you think having a group to look at membership, what it means and so forth, if you could respond affirmatively in the chat box, or equally if you think that's a dreadful idea, please likewise use the chat function so we can gather your views. That would be really useful. And yes, I guess whilst people are doing that, Wendy, apologies, I hadn't realised you were trying to come in. So if I could bring you in now, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, there were so many bits actually that I concurred. I mean, Janet started me off, and it was I felt, you know, that a lot of the points that she raised were really important about understanding the constituency which we represent and recognising that it may be quite a limited one. Although I would also probably say that I suspect if people were to really check their, you know, their experience, you know, really go back through their work experience and everything else, they'd probably realise there's a lot more there, and there's a lot more groups that they could be engaging with and perhaps should be engaging with. It's almost a case of, you know, think outside of your immediate contacts, and then you'll find more diversity. I'll give an example that of late, and in fact in the last month, my husband and my immediate family have lost two working men, one who my husband worked with in grounds maintenance, and another who was a taxi driver, both working class, white males, and both to heart attacks. And we know that, you know, COVID has thrown up the fact that working class men have been, you know, relatively speaking, disproportionately affected by and impacted by COVID. And I'm pretty sure everyone here knows that there are real issues about men and attendance at hospitals and doctors and reporting ill health. And I just think that we now is possibly an opportunity. COVID has thrown up all those inequalities that have actually been there a long, long time. And we really ought to perhaps, you know, when we talk about prioritising, we really ought to look at how do we engage with those communities? Where do those communities meet? And as Neil said, I did work around inequalities. I've done so for best part of 30 odd years. And there were times when we wanted to get people back into learning, and we set up stands outside Aldi. We went to working men's clubs. We held music events, and we reached far more people than the college had reached in 10 years. We reached those in a year and got them qualified. So there are lots of, it is about looking differently at how you engage. It is about, I suppose, when we're looking at membership, we need, for me, there's three things: the roles, our responsibilities, and our rights, and the rights of the people we represent, and how we can make sure that those things work for the benefit of the organisation. So in other words, the organisation will be, I genuinely feel, will become richer by embracing a greater diversity, because you'll bring in new experiences, you'll bring in new contacts and networks, you'll bring in new ideas and new support. And I just think, you know, that now is the time to really grab it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wendy. Again, some really good points coming through there. As you say, there's the point about there's an opportunity to to intervene now. I think in extending that, I think also we've got people's attention actually as well. There's been a huge interest in what the NHS is doing. So actually, in addition to the need to do things in terms of the need to address health inequalities, which, as you say rightly, is a huge problem, actually we've also got people, I think, get more engaged than ever perhaps in the work of the NHS. People are sort of wanting to talk to us perhaps more so than before. And I think you make a good point there about actually reaching out to people, going to people where people contribute. And that, of course, that could be virtually as well as physically, couldn't it? But I think that's again a really powerful point that we've looked at in the context of developing our recovery college offer, actually, rather than come and have some therapy at the mental health hospital. Actually come and join a course, actually, and framing it in a different way actually has a really surprisingly positive impact on the people that will engage with supporting actions to improve their mental health in that case. So I think that's a really well made point. So I want to come and bring Zoe in, and then I'll come to Sam. So Zoe, if I could bring you in now.
Hi, yeah, sorry, still can't see me on the video. Yeah, really good points, really interesting for me. I think it's just about the purpose of membership. I mean, it might be a statutory thing or something that has to be done by the trust, and I just don't quite understand that. So I can park that, but that is a question. Is that as important? Is recruiting members more important or as important than hearing the voice of the public and the majority and getting their voices back, filtering that back into the NHFT? That's one question. How important, yeah, what's the most important drive? Is it, I'm assuming it's not a paper exercise, I'm assuming it's that we really want to hear from the public. And so then I want to know, you know, I hear Wendy talking about going into groups, and that's fine. And I do have access to certain groups of people that I work with, the additional needs community, but I don't have access to everybody. And I couldn't imagine, especially now anyway, but before I was really keen on visiting more services and doing that kind of thing. But I really don't see that I should be seeking people out and kind of creating events in order for people to know about it. And loads of people walk past a stand, loads of people see the word membership and they go, I don't want to get caught. I don't want to sign up for something else to do in my busy life. And I think what people need is that we as governors need to make it easy for people to come to us, not that they have to sign a piece of paper in order to speak us, to sign up as a member. They just need to feel free to chat. And I don't think that's on stalls and stands. I think that could be in lots of different ways. I'm a big fan of, I mean, I do loads of stuff for my project on constantly Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and like there are channels that make it really easy for people to comment. And if you make it hard, they won't. And then I'm thinking, so why? Well, what's the function of that signing up on a piece of paper to become a member? Is it just to say we have this amount of members? Is that important? Or is it more about we hear from this number of people because they can see our posters in the surgeries, they know how to phone, they know where to email, they know who's representing their specific area, they have a face. It's not like they've got a face to the organisation. They feel they can approach, it's approachable. It's not this kind of clinical, you know, dialed 111. You know, it's not that. It's like, I know that's not the same, but what I'm saying is they know that there's somebody representing their views. Sorry, I know going on there, but do you see what I'm coming from?
I think it's a really great point, and in part, I think it's almost starting the conversation of the group we were talking about. Really, as you say, there's a real danger of tokenism, isn't there? If we're going out and chasing members and say, well, we need to have a certain number of members, we sort of hit the target and miss the point, don't we? In the sense that, at least from my perspective, that the whole point of members is getting people engaged in improving health and well-being, really, and in part that's increasing health literacy, so people know how to access services that they need. That's getting them thinking about what actions they can take themselves. It's equally about informing the trust. Well, actually, have we got the right service offering to meet the needs of our population, actually? So I think there's a whole heap of things. Those are just some ideas, but I think it would be great to feed that into the discussion, actually. So I can see Sam and Alan wanted to come in. I just want to do a time check really with Krishni.
Yes, so sorry, hang on guys. I just want to say I think we're going to run out of time very quickly now, Richard. So I don't want to, I think we could probably take what's the people who've sort of expressed, you know, that they want to come in, we can probably allow the conversation to continue for a little bit longer. But important, really, I think what I think is really encouraging. There's a lot of views and a lot of really interesting thoughts, and actually what that gives me is a real sense that we need to continue this conversation, and it reinforces the fact that it's the start of a conversation, not the end. So really valuable points. So I think let's let everybody who's already said they'd like to speak to come in, and can we just give it maybe another 10 minutes and then draw this to a close and think about how we go forward to the next stage. Thanks, Richard.
Absolutely, thanks, Krishni. So I think Sam was first, and then Alan, then Fiona. So Sam, over to you.
I just, in a way, I kind of wanted to say what Krishni's just said. I suppose from my perspective, this is supposed to be a discussion about recovering the governors and the aspects of delivery that governors should be delivering. And whilst I think a lot of the talk about the membership element is commendable and useful, I also think, actually, for me, we have in our governance structure, you know, subgroups that hold accountability for some of these issues. So I suppose I'm slightly concerned that we've been sidetracked by a conversation that we've had many times in my last 12 to whatever months, 18 months. And I suppose for me, what it really brings home is, at the moment, we are not working in a kind of in the same way with the subgroups that we were pre-COVID. So that whole rhythm of, we had a council of governors, we had subgroup meetings, we had a forum, all of those sorts of things were the mechanisms where I think some of the issues we've talked about today were able to be discussed. And for me, what's really important for us to think about in recovery is, what does that rhythm look like and how does that look? Because we've got very limited time. It will be another X months before any of us kind of properly meet again. And I think we're missing an opportunity to say, okay, the amount of conversation and positive ideas that have been generated today need to have a place to sit and to properly be explored and discussed, whether that's M&G, whether that's a separate whatever it is. And I think for me, I just wanted to try and get us to a point of agreeing what our sort of recovery structure will look like, because I think that's really important and very missing at the moment for governors. So that's my piece. Thank you. Sorry.
I think that's a really good point, Sam. And I don't know, Fiona, whether that was what you were coming in on, but if it wasn't, maybe I can ask you to comment. Oh.
You're on mute, Fiona.
Sorry. I just wanted to give Chris Davison a chance to come in, because clearly we were obviously wanting to build on what M&G has done, but I'm just conscious that I don't think Chris has been able to raise his hand. So just over to Chris.
Actually, I would prefer if Alan came in. He's been waiting a long time. If I'm afforded a chance after him just to say a few concluding remarks, I'd be grateful, but I would really like Alan's input, please.
Alan?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can now, Alan.
Splendid. Good afternoon, everybody. If I start off with the comment that in the minds of the vast majority of the population of the county, the thought in their head of what the NHS is comes out of hospitals. Time and time again, in all kinds of different sectors of business, marketing, public service, involvement and engagement is the maximum opportunity to actually engage and create participation in the trust. Whether that's engagement simply through a route of care, or engagement simply because somebody says, actually, I'm really interested in this. And this whole paper that paper E that's been the subject of this discussion, really it's start and continue every area in the best way that we can. But I still think there is a weakness, not in a critical sense, but there is a weakness amongst governors that I perceive generally of how do we address this? Where do we go? What do we do? How can we become best equipped to start this engagement process, to start exploiting the routes of participation that members of the general public have with the trust, and to start to highlight how important that is within the social fabric of the county, and start to get and create much more engagement and a greater range of participation, involvement, and understanding across the county's population. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan. Yeah, some good points. Could I turn then back to Chris maybe, and then we'll start to think about looking at Christy finishing up for the next meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Those were wise words from Alan, as usual. Thank you, Alan. I think the perception in the wider population, it's even more black and white than that. People think the NHS is just doctors and nurses and acute hospitals. We saw that in COVID, you know, that a lot of the goods and the gifts were going to our colleagues and friends in acute trust, which is absolutely, you know, right, but people don't have it in their consciousness. When I go and give talks, I try and start by saying, we are not Kettering General, we're not NGO. I think there's a lot of richness and diverseness. That's not the right word, is it? I'm struggling a bit. There's a lot of richness and diverse views being expressed, and people are right that this would normally be the domain of the membership and governance group. And notwithstanding Sam's helpful comment about what structure we're offering, I think this is such an important topic that it would merit a one-off, whatever you want to call it, task and finish group, just to generate these ideas. I was reminded during the lockdown, I was clearing out some papers. In the Constitution, it says very clearly that no governor has any rights or special privileges over and above anyone else. And I think in the present climate and with the changing landscape, I would support there being a task and finish group looking at how we can bring some of these richness of ideas and thoughts. I mean, in answer to Zoe, we do have to have members, it's a constitutional right, but nonetheless, we need to think about what we offer. How do we represent the public? What, not just our strategy, our communications, I agree. Just so governors know, a 6 weekly bulletin goes to members, sorry, 6 weekly editions it's called, and then there's 2 editions of paper copy called the bulletin that goes out in the summer and winter. Only a third of our members are on email. And we do need to think of different ways of communicating and engaging, not just in terms of the content. And comms have been involved. I was at a working group a couple of weeks ago looking at the content of the next summer edition of Bulletin. So I think, thank you everyone, as chair of M&G, for such a brilliant range of ideas, thoughts, reflections. I want to build on that. And I would suggest and support having a small task and finish group that every governor, irrespective of what constituency you represent, all of us are equal. All of us are equal, and I'd welcome your thoughts, ideas and reflections, as this is a start of a conversation, and with input from Richard, Joan and others, and comms, how we could best develop this going forward, particularly into the new normal, and looking at different ways of engaging, communicating and representing the public. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. So I think we'll look to try and wrap things up now, but I think the suggestion there was that we essentially, in terms of taking this forwards, facilitate a task and finish group with an open invitation to council members that could then inform the next steps with this piece of work. So I guess to close, it would be useful just to get people's feedback and thoughts on whether they support that as an outcome and as an action really from today's meeting. If so, we can then work to set that up. Of course, whilst people are putting the comments, etc., in the chat box, it's worth also saying, of course, that we will go away as corporate affairs and pull together all of the chat content and the notes from this session and get it circulated round. So we won't have lost any of the ideas and the richness of the conversation. So that will come out anyway, virtually. And of course, irrespective of what we decide in terms of taking this forward, we'd be really interested to have conversations with you individually if you wanted to get in touch with us in the corporate affairs team or via the Foundation Trust mailbox. So just some thoughts on whether you would support us taking this forward as a sort of an open invitation task and finish group, as Chris suggested. That would be useful.
Great. And whilst that's happening, Richard, have I got, yeah, whilst that's happening and people are commenting, I think it's really important to say that part of the reason why we wanted to have a conversation was actually, I think, recognising that one of the challenges we're going to have is maintaining all our current structures as they are under a pandemic situation. So actually, are there, you know, some of these conversations are too important not to act on them. So if we actually feel that people would like to take something forward, we can do that in a managed way, and you know, building on the great work that M&G have already done, but importantly involving quite a large number of new governors who currently, if you think about it, are not members of these various groups, because when they joined, you know, these groups haven't run. So I think the opportunity is there for us now to really sort of just think about how we build on the great work we've already done, do some work to keep some of the momentum going now, or rebuild the momentum, because we've done a lot of great work in M&G already, involve a whole load of new people who clearly have lots of thoughts and ideas, so everyone can build that up together. And I think, you know, what's been really great is having lots of new voices in that conversation today that I think will be really interesting to build on. So thank you very much. Janet, if it's very brief, I'll bring you in, but I'm quite keen to close the meeting, if I may. We can't hear you, Janet.
Yeah, just to say, very briefly, Chair, just to say that one new member has already approached me with a wish to join the subgroup that I chair. So I think it would be premature to think that new governors won't be interested in the work of existing subgroups. And I'd be very worried if this approach was going to brush aside what's happened in the past. I think we've got to be careful not to throw babies out with the bathwater.
And I think that's a really important point, Janet. We've also got to just think very carefully about what we can support in a pandemic situation where the trust remains on level 4. And actually, the reality is we can't just go back to where we were pre-pandemic because we haven't got the capacity. So there is something about being really clear about our priorities and focusing on those and working out ways in which we can continue to do that work, but in a managed way. So that's not to say we should throw everything out that we've already done, absolutely not. But it does mean that we, I think, just need to be clear what our really focused priorities need to be, that we can actually support and manage. Because if we literally go back to exactly what we were doing before, I don't think that the capacity will exist within the organisation to support that, and that's the challenge. So what we've got to work out is how do we do all of this, move this conversation forward whilst making a manageable and still structured way of going forward. So I suppose Sam made the point that, you know, what's the recovery plan for governors or governance, and actually that's really part of what this conversation is about, is what do we actually need? What are the outcomes we need to achieve? Let's then think about the function or the form that might support that. And in a sense, most important is the focus on outcome. So let's think about, we'll take all this away, have a look at all the comments that people have made, and really try and build on that. Absolutely keen that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I know all the good work and good discussions that M&G in particular on this issue have done. But this is just one example. There's a whole load of other things, isn't there, that we were doing, and we need to think about how we take that forward. And I think that's the next stage. So we'll bring all that together, and I think probably it'd be useful to try and summarise that into a document of some kind that really just pulls what the thoughts and comments that people have made, and then we can send that back out, and hopefully with some clear next steps. But thank you all so much for your contributions. That was the bit I'm most pleased about, is so many people had different views to comment on, and the chat box was filled up rather nicely, so plenty for us to reflect on. That brings us to the close of our formal public meeting, and we do have a private meeting at which we're going to need to focus on a few specific issues, statutory duties that the governors have. And that's only for governor colleagues, so and the corporate governance team and myself. So the Neds who are still on the call can head off. Shall we give ourselves just a short 5-minute stretch your legs again, and back in just after 10:02, just to get cracking on the private meeting? Is that okay? See you shortly, and don't forget it's a separate link, isn't it? Tracy, do you want to comment?
Sorry, that's what I was just going to say, that there's a separate link for the private session, so everybody will need to log out and then log back into the private link for the next meeting.
Okay, thanks Tracy. Right, see you all there shortly. Thank you.